Ahoy everybody, Commodore Vice here for the next episode of Navigating the Game, 7th C, 2nd Edition. I like to teach people how to play 7th C 2nd Edition in these videos, so follow along. This video is going to be mostly about character creation. Now, a lot of people like to do character creation first because they think it's the best way to kind of explore the system. However, I'm doing it a little bit later in the tutorial on how to play this game, simply because I find that if you start with character creation, you're spending points and getting abilities that you don't quite understand what they do, which makes it a little unsatisfying when you eventually play your character. I like to do character creation later on, simply because when you do it later on, you can look at the abilities that you'll be getting and where you're putting the stats and be like, well, I know what this does, so I would like to put some stats in this. Alright, so character creation, as all things, starts with concept. Concept is always the first step. You have to know what you want to play before you can actually build it. Now, I'm going to be doing an example along with you to kind of show you how this process works. So, when it comes to concept, let's say our concept for today is a dashing, handsome, interesting, charismatic captain by the name of Vice. I know, original. Anyway, so this captain, we'll say, is a captain of a ship, maybe with a little bit of Irish in him. Since we're playing the 1600s, I appreciate the Irish culture, especially in those ages. But we'll say he's got a little bit of Irish in him. And sorry, not Ireland. I forgot 7th C. It's not quite Ireland. But maybe he comes from a long line of pirates. The Vice line of pirates, if you will. And he is just looking to explore and have fun, and he's a little bit of a bon vivant. I mean, you can go deeper into your concept if you want to, even writing entire pages, if that helps you out. But it's good to think of, like, important little facts, like what the character likes, what they appreciate doing, what they've done in the past, where they come from. Flesh them out as much as possible. I find that the more you know about the character before you start building them, the easier the choices are to make. Now, once you've got concept down, you move on to traits. The brawn, finesse, wits, resolve, and panache. All of these start at 2 for a hero character. But then, on top of those 2, you get to put 2 more points into anything you feel is appropriate. Let's go to our example. The Hero Vice, pirate captain. So he starts with 2 in all of his traits, so we get 2 additional points to put in those traits. Well, he's particularly charming. Thank you. So we put an extra dot in panache. And let's say he has a interesting focus in moving fast and staying on his feet, since he's a pirate captain and has to move around ropes and run along the deck. So we'll give him an extra point in finesse as well. Now, once you finish traits, you move on to the nation bonus. Now, by doing this, you pick which nation of Thay this individual came from. And by picking which nation of Thay they came from, they get an additional trait bonus depending on which nation you pick. Now, I'll be going over the histories and interesting facts about the nations of Thay in later videos in this series, when I start exploring the world as opposed to the system. So we'll go over that later. But right now, the nations you can pick from are Avalon, which is a lot like England, except there's fairies. There's the Highland Marches, which is a lot like Scotland. Castile, which is a lot like Spain. Eisen is the Thayan version of Germany. Montagne is the Thayan version of France. Sarmatia is the Thayan version of kind of the Czech Republic, Slovakia area. Usara is the version of Russia. Vestin is the version of, well, like the northern regions. Think Viking areas like Finland and Sweden. Very rough and raidy, but have recently become more mercantile and peaceful. And Vorici is the southern Italy version in Thay. And then finally we have Inishmore, which is the Thayan version of Ireland, which is, I think, what we're going to put for our example's nation of origin. Now, Inishmore gives you an additional dot in panache or wits. And, like I said, because I said this person is particularly charming, not necessarily the brightest, we'll go ahead and put that additional dot in panache instead of wits. Now that you've got your traits picked out and your nation of origin, you can go on to backgrounds. Now, you get 2 backgrounds of your choice, and this kind of explains where your character came from, but it also gives you advantages and points in some skills for, the sake of your trouble, as well as representing a few other things. Now, backgrounds have restrictions. Well, some of them have restrictions, and these restrictions can be anything like depending on the culture you came from. For example, some backgrounds can't be taken unless you came from the Highland Marches, or Avalon, or some other nation. Other restrictions can't include that a background can be taken unless you have a particular advantage. But if you don't qualify for the restriction, you can't take the background. But they're not all that common, so it should be mostly free picking. Each background also has a quirk. Now, a quirk is an activity or action that represents kind of where this character came from. And if they partake or are affected by this quirk, you actually get a hero point for your trouble. Now, you can only use one quirk once per session, so you can't constantly do the same action over and over and expect to keep getting hero points for it. Even though you can do it to represent your character, you don't want to overplay it. Mainly, it's just kind of a added little, quirk that makes your character interesting and gives you an opportunity to get a hero point. Each background also has a list of advantages and skills. The advantages are abilities that your character gets for coming from that background, and skills are, for each skill on the list, you get an additional dot in that skill, showing that that character was trained in that area of expertise. So I think for our example, one of his backgrounds is going to be pirate, since it seems most appropriate. Now, he has the quirk that he will get a hero point whenever he makes a personal sacrifice to ensure another person's freedom, since that's mostly what pirates are about. He also gets the advantages of Deadeye and Indomitable Will. On top of those advantages, he gains a point in Aim, Intimidate, Sailing, Notice, and Theft, which will help him make those rolls in the future. I think the other background we're going to give him is called Ship's Captain. Now, this has the quirk that he gains a hero point whenever he is the last one to safety after his crew. He makes sure everybody else is safe before himself. He'll gain a hero point. Now, this background actually gives him the advantages of Married to the Sea, Sea Legs, and Leadership. On top of those advantages, he also gets a point in Aim, Convince, Notice, Sailing, and Warfare. Now, you'll notice some of those skills are the same as on the previous backgrounds list, which means he gets 2 points in them, instead of just the 1, since they're on both lists. So, he'll have 2 points in those skills, as well as 1 point in every other one that was unique to the other background. I'm going to go over skills. And instead of going to our example and explaining why I'm putting every dot in skills, I'll just have it up here while I'm talking. Skills are going to be, you're going to have 10 additional points to put in any skills as you want, as well as, the points that you got from your backgrounds. Now, you can't go above 3 when you're starting a character. You don't want a character that starts with 5 points, and they have no place to advance to. It's mainly just a soft cap, so spread your points out, don't go above 3, and, figure out what really represents your character. What are they knowledgeable in? What can they do? What are they good at? What do they have a natural talent for? Now, when you have 3 in a skill, you can re-roll any one of the dice when you roll for a risk, which is a nice little bonus. When you have 4 in a skill, you can put groups of 15 together instead of groups of 10 to get 2 raises. And this is good because when you put groups of 15 together to get 2 raises, you're actually cutting the cost of 1 raise down by half. So it's like buy 1, get 1 half off. And when you have 5 raises, you actually get the 10 explodes advantage for free on that skill. So whenever you roll that skill, if you roll a 10, you get to roll another d10 to keep the raises going. So if you roll a 10, you get to throw another dice in there, roll again. If that's a 10, you get to roll another dice. You can see how this can get really advantageous and really in your favor, getting like tons of raises, maybe one turn even getting 10 raises and ruling all of combat or all of the action sequence. But that's for really being really good at that skill, which can be a tough goal to reach. Okay, once you've got your skills figured out, we move on to advantages. Now, advantages, like I said, are special abilities or interesting bonuses your character gets depending on certain things. Now, advantages come in like 3 basic sets. There's passive advantages, which you don't really have to do anything for, but they give you bonuses in particular certain circumstances. Then there's knacks. Now, knacks are abilities you get, but you have to spend a hero point in order to activate them. Like spending a hero point and being able to seduce somebody or convince them to come into a room alone. There is actually an advantage for them. And then the third type is going to be innate. Now, innate advantages you can only take at character creation because it doesn't really make sense as an advancement. For example, the small advantage. It gives you a bonus dice when your height comes into play because you're extraordinarily small. Well, you can't really take that one later because it doesn't make sense that your character just randomly lost a foot or two. Like, it's something that has to be done at character creation, and that's where the innate advantages come in. If you want an innate advantage, you have to do it right now at character creation, otherwise the opportunity is lost to you. Now, advantages are split up into groups from point value. All advantages have a point value from 1 to 5. When we're doing our example here, I'm going to go ahead and give him the sniper advantage, which gives him an additional die when he makes an aim risk with a long-barreled musket, because we're going to say Argo is more of a stay at the wheel and fire with a musket at the opposing ship kind of guy, as opposed to the swashbuckling up-front sword fighter. Now, the sniper advantage is a 3-point advantage. You get 5 points to spend at character creation, so that leaves us with 2 points left. And I think with those 2 points, I'm going to go ahead and get the got it advantage. Now, the got it advantage is actually a knack. It's something you have to spend a hero point for. You spend a hero point and you disarm a trap or unlock a lock just like that. Because let's say, well, Vice came from a bit of a rough background, being the lineage of pirates, and knows how to get into a safe or two. Now we're going to be getting into the Arcana section of character creation. And how Arcana work, it's like an advantage and a downfall, a virtue and a vice your character have. This is divided into symbols from what's called the Sorte deck, which is a sort of tarot-esque deck that exists inside the setting of Thay. Each of these symbols has a benefit and a negative to it. Now, you'll go through all the different arcana, the lovers, the moon, all of the different symbols, and each one will have a virtue and a hubris. Now, the virtue is an ability you can activate at any time once per session to give you a bonus or give you some sort of cool ability. The hubris is a set of actions or circumstances that will actually give you a hero point if you undertake, but they're typically negative and cause you some sort of detriment. There's 2 ways to pick your character's virtue and hubris. You can either go through the book and pick the ones that are most appropriate for them, and find abilities that make sense for them. Be like, this makes sense for my character, I'm going to go ahead and put that as my virtue, and, well, he is kind of hot-headed, so I'll take the hot-headed hubris from the Emperor. That is a totally fine option. There is also a set of cards for the Sorte deck that is actually in print from John Wick Games, the people that actually made 7th Sea, and if I can find a link to it, I'll put it down in the description, and you can decide if you want to get the Sorte deck as well, and just pull cards out at random and see what your character's fate is. For our example, I think I'm going to go ahead and give him the virtue, the Lovers, which is actually going to give him the ability to, once per session, he can activate his virtue and take wounds for an ally, where he will gain 1 dramatic wound and they will be prevented from taking wounds, period. And then I feel for his hubris, since he comes from a long line of pirates and feels himself maybe a little arrogant, we'll give him the arrogant hubris from the Tower Sorte card. Now, what this does, whenever he shows disdain or looks down on a villain or somebody who could cause harm to his friends, he actually gets a hero point. Now, you can see how this can be detrimental and make him and his friends a target, but it will gain him a hero point for acting in character in that situation. We're coming to the second to last part of this video, which is going to be the stories of a hero. Now, when you're creating a character, it's a good idea to come up with an initial story, and the hero stories are basically how your characters advance. It's what gives you points towards advancement, or gives you some sort of reward of advancement at the end of the story itself. They're pretty simple, they're pretty straightforward, and they are pretty simple to make. We're going to go over them right now. When you're writing your first hero story, or a story specific to your character, as opposed to a story your GM will make, which will give you points for the entire party, these ones give you points personally, and are your character's own personal motivations. So when you come up with one of these for the first time, what you're going to want to start with is a name for your story. Now, giving your story a name will make its intent pretty obvious. You don't want to be too specific, more a little vague. It'll give you an idea of where you're going with this story and what your character wants to accomplish. For example, I think our example story, we're going to give Vice a story called A Name to Remember. And we'll get into that in a second because we'll go on to the next step. We want to determine the goal and reward for the story. Now what this means is that we want to determine what the end result of the story is. And once again, you want to be vague. You don't want to be too specific, because if you're too specific, as you go through the steps of a story, you may find that how you thought the completion would come to be is a little bit different, a little changed. Maybe if you want to defeat an enemy instead of kill this person, or something like that, because the end of the story might not actually be your character killing that villain. It would be more of you expose them for their villainy and get them taken out of the seat of power they have. That would be considered a defeat as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific outcome so much as the general idea of what you want to happen. So in Vice's story, A Name to Remember, we're going to say the outcome is to gain a sense of renown, since he kind of lives in the shadow of his lineage and wants to be known as a great pirate in and of himself. So we're going to say gain a sense of renown, because this is vague enough that it has a distinct endpoint, but it doesn't have a distinct method to get to that endpoint. Like, he could be famous or infamous. We'll see. When we're determining the reward for your story, you get to basically choose skills, advantages, or other things that you want to be your reward at the end. Now, the reward has a certain point value associated to it that will determine the number of steps that must be taken in the story. Skills have a requirement of the new dot in the skill is how many steps. For example, if you wanted to get a rank 1 skill, it would only be 1 step. However, if you have a rank 4 skill that you want to become a rank 5 skill, you would have to have a 5-step story. But basically, this is how your character advances and how you learn new traits and skills. And it depends on how many steps the story has as to what you can get for a reward. So, let's say for our example, the reward we want is actually to increase his aim dots to 4 instead of 3. So in order to do that, we'll need a 4-step story. Now, we don't have to determine every step of the story, since we don't want to predetermine what all the consequences are. So if we're not writing all 4 steps, basically what we want to do is just write down the first step to the story. The first goal this character has to accomplish to complete the entirety of this arc. So to gain a name of his own, we're going to have to say Vice, the first step to his story is find a worthy cause. By doing this, he can eventually work himself into being infamous or famous, just gaining a name for himself. He needs a worthy cause to do that. So that'll be the first step to his 4-step story. Now, when he completes that first step, he can write the next step. When he gets to the 3rd step, he'll decide what the final step is after he completes it. And then once he completes that final step and achieves his goal, which we have written down, he will gain that reward, which is a pretty interesting way to advance, actually, compared to some other games, but it's fun. We're coming to the last part of character creation, which is detail. Now, these details are just small things that may or may not apply to your character, like reputation being the first detail. You typically don't start with a reputation unless you come to a determination with your GM, or if you have an advantage that gives it to you. Now, reputation is just like a one-word description that will influence how NPCs react to your character. Say if your character's reputation is as a scoundrel, they may approach you with a bit of hesitation or worry, unless they themselves are scoundrels, where they might welcome you with open arms and see you as a brother. The next detail is language, and there's lots of languages in Thay. You get 1 language for every dot in wits. Now, since you start with 2 dots in wits, You will start with Old Thayan, which is the common trade tongue for the entire nation, language that most people share. And you'll also get the language of your native country. So if you have your character coming from Eisen, they will speak Old Thayan and Eisen. Now, if you have more than 2 dots in wits, you can gain additional languages for every dot above 2. Possibly people you commonly trade with, or some of your friends that you know. Detail 3 is secret societies. Now, secret societies are something that you can join at character creation for free, and we'll actually be going over secret societies in some of the Exploring the World. Once I get past the system, we're going to look into some of the narrative aspects of the world, including the countries and the secret societies. If you want to join a secret society, it's free. It doesn't necessarily cost you anything. However, there are some things to keep in mind. If you start your character out in a secret society, they gain 2 favor with that secret society that they can spend to gain benefits and advantages from them. However, they may have to do something for that secret society throughout the game. The GM may have agents of that society come up to your character and ask them to do a favor to help out their fellow society members. That's kind of the point of having a society. So, unfortunately, even though it's technically free to join, you will be expected to do something for them. And then the final detail is going to be wealth. Now, wealth isn't exactly what you might expect. It's considered a common thing that all heroes have enough money to cover their clothes, alcohol, basic items, a room at the tavern or inn. Like, they have enough money to take care of themselves in a very basic, common manner. If you want your character to go into a pub and buy a round, you don't have to spend a point of wealth, because it's just assumed that you at least have enough money for that. However, wealth is a sense of the extra on top of the average money your character has. Now, your wealth starts at 0 at the beginning of every session, unless you have an advantage that helps you with that. You can also have your character gain wealth by saying they did a profession in their downtime, or have them do a profession during the game. Now, how professions work is they're associated with a skill, and you gain a number of dots in wealth for doing that profession per that skill. What this means is if you had your character earning money as a pirate or sailor or fisherman while there was downtime or during the course of a episode or session, you will have them find a skill that's appropriate, most likely sailing, and you will gain a number of points of wealth equal to the number of dots in that skill. So if your sailing is 3, your dots of wealth you will get from earning that profession is going to be 3. Simple enough. Now the question of what can you do with wealth comes out. Well, wealth, it can be spent in a number of ways. The most immediately system-appropriate way or system-relevant way is that if you're doing a risk or action that requires a bribe or a gift, you can spend wealth to reroll some of the dice. So let's say, for example, you're bribing guards to look the other way. You would probably roll some sort of panache convince or panache tempt roll. Now, when you make that roll, let's say there's 3 guards and you want to pay each of them off, you would spend 3 wealth. And by spending that 3 wealth, you would be able to re-roll any of the dice that you roll that you feel are too low up to 3. So, let's say you roll 4 dice, you feel a couple of them are pretty low, you spend the 3 wealth, you can re-roll 3 of those dice and hopefully get a higher result. Other advantages of having wealth, by spending 1 wealth, you can get a high quality, relatively common item. So let's say you want a fancy sword or a fancy outfit or something of that nature. You would spend 1 wealth and you would get a higher quality item of that same thing. Not necessarily a system benefit, you don't necessarily get any dice bonuses, but it may come into role-playing and stuff like that your character has a very nice item of that fashion. By spending 3 wealth, you can hire basically a brute squad of strength 5, which is basically a group of thugs and ruffians about 5 strong that will do your bidding for a scene. 5 wealth can get you a non-unique, hard-to-acquire item, or possibly an illegal item, like anything like a guard's outfit, or basically anything that is not one of a kind, but is very, very rare. Like a special jewel-encrusted sword. I don't imagine it's just one of a kind. You can't get a specific jewel-encrusted sword, but you can get a very, very, very fancy sword for 5 wealth. Now, when you get into 8 and 10 wealth, you can usually buy some sort of property, like a ship, a business. You can buy your own house for 8 to 10 wealth. Now, that's hard to acquire in one session, unless you have a very, very generous GM. So it's good to note that if you talk to your GM, you can potentially avoid the you start every session with 0 wealth rule. You can basically say, hey, my character is being very careful with their money, and if you show through role-playing that they are being very frugal, you can say, hey, my character is being very careful with their money, they're trying to save up to buy a business, they're trying to save up to buy a house, they're trying to save up to buy a ship. And your GM can go, okay, then you can carry your wealth over to the next session. And you can keep doing that until they have enough wealth to actually get the item they're seeking. So, yeah, hopefully you can all retire rich. That actually brings us to the end of our character creation video. The next video is going to be on GM systems and GM rules. As a player, it could be interesting to know these, it could be helpful, but really, if you're just being a player and you're not going to run the game, you don't necessarily have to see that video. But if you are intending to run the game, it might be very helpful. We're going to go over things like danger points, we're going to go over villains, we're going to go over brute squads, stuff like that. Yeah, if you like this content, if you want to learn more about these games, if you want to learn more about games I run in the future, or if you want to see me play some games, or even learn the ins and outs of other systems, I encourage you to like and subscribe. It would help the channel, and it would let you know when more of this information is coming out. I've got a link down below for Drive-Thru RPG for the 7th Sea book, if you're interested in getting it. If you want to play this game, it's really fun. I encourage it. Also, that link is an affiliate link, so I will get 5% of anything you spend at Drive-Thru RPG up to 15 days after clicking that link, which will help me out, it'll help the channel out, it'll help me improve maybe my camera, my graphics, stuff like that. Yeah, so thank you very much. Also in the link, or in the description below, I will have that link for the Sorte deck. I don't know if it'll be Drive-Thru RPG, but I will find a link to a Sorte deck. That way you can decide if you want to do your Arcana at random. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll join me for the rest of the journey.